I hadn't really considered this before this episode, but what pronouns do you use for the hive mind? We, they, them? I guess that would kind of work because it's both plural and non-gendered. But does the hive mind decide it has a gender at different points if you're talking to different individuals, so you should use a gendered pronoun? But is there a plural gendered pronoun? But I guess there would be in other languages. Oh my god, I'm talking about pronouns. I've made this woke! Sorry, that was a terrible opening, but hello everybody. I am here to review the latest episode of Apple TV's Pluribus. This one, episode 4, Please Carol. And yet again, we have another really, really strong episode. I've been watching other people's reactions to this show, and there's been actually some pretty strong reactions. There's been a lot of people that have just really adored this show and been fully on board, which is kind of where I'm at. I have some criticisms as I've made them known over the past few weeks, but I really, really love this show. It's exactly my kind of show, like high concept sci-fi that really like dives into the ideas and philosophies of it and is really exploring it in a very full way. But then there's been also some other people who have just been kind of out on it for how slow it is, how frustrating Carol can be as a character, which I fully agree upon, as well as the fact that it's taken so long for the show to start asking some questions that we're just now starting to get in episode 4 that I think a lot of us, myself included, would have started asking if we were Carol a hell of a lot sooner. So I certainly understand the criticisms of the show, but I'm just really adoring the pace that the show is unfolding week to week. And again, it's very similar to Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, where it had a very deliberate, slow pace, but it all seems to come together as the show continues to go on. And I really am on Vince Gilligan's wavelength, I feel like, with this show overall. So heavily enjoying it. I think the first thing that I kind of want to touch upon, even though it's slightly out of order, but I'm just going to put it right up front just to get all the people who are going to jump out whenever I mention these topics right off the front. But one element of the show that I really, really liked, and one that just keeps kind of coming up, and I'm really liking how it's being integrated, is how much queerness is informing Carol's character throughout the show. I mean, I've talked about, how she sort of homogenized her work to make it a straight character in her story, the straight boy pirate instead of a girl pirate. Like, there's these elements of like talking about like how queer people are forced to assimilate or not, and that tying into these themes of individualism versus collectivism and all of those ideas that the show is wrestling with. And again, we get a really great way that that's brought up in this episode as well, because we learn that part of Carol's instinctive reaction to the hive mind and not wanting to be a part of it, outside of just American individualism that I think a lot of people have pointed out with Carol's character, is also from the place of her being queer and having gone to conversion therapy, and her conversion therapist trying to force her to be straight, try to force her to be one way. And I really like that that's brought into this conversation, and I'm really liking that, I listened to the podcast, behind the scenes podcast of the show, and Vince Gilligan talked about how he wrote the show initially for a man, but then wrote it for Rhea once, he realized that she could play the lead character and loved her in Better Call Saul. But I like that wasn't just incidental. It wasn't like putting Sigourney Weaver in as Ripley in the very first Alien movie where they just swapped out the character. Like, there's actual... not to say that there's not some feminist themes, obviously, with that movie. I don't want to negate Alien, which is a movie that I really love, and the feminist themes in it. But it does seem that there was more work put in with this film, or with this show, I should say, to integrate queerness, because we're having this tension here where I think a lot of people rightly pointed out in the very second episode of the show, Carol, arguing like we need to be individual, we need to, the hive mind is inherently a bad thing, and trying to argue with that with all these people from different cultures, and her coming across as this Karen, especially as you have the American flag from Air Force One flying right behind her in that episode, like very clearly trying to symbolize that mentality of the sort of individualism that America and like neoliberalists thought, that all that jazz that I rant about in other videos brings with it. But here, now her desire for agency and to not be forced to assimilate is tied directly into her queerness by relating it to conversion therapy. And again, I'm really loving that this show is exploring all aspects of this theme of individualism versus collectivism. That it's not just like individualism good and collectivism bad, as you would get in something like, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is a very American-based movie. But it's also not saying collectivism fully good either. And there's these conversations about assimilation and also agency and what it means to be another person and trying to understand another person. Because we even get the hive mind saying to Carol that you've never been me. I've been you, but you've never been me. And I think that that's fair. But there's also this lack of the hive mind wanting to acknowledge Carol's agency. And she even brings it up at the end, when she's sort of yelling at the hive mind to stay back as she's injecting Zosha with a drug and saying, I have agency, you can't take it away from me, I have agency. Like, that's such a big thing for her. And yet at the same time, she's taking Zosha's agency away too in that moment by, or at least the hive minds. Because again, Zosha, the person, the individual, was never asked either if she wanted to be part of this hive mind. Like, she's taking away that, the hive mind's agency in that moment too by drugging her. So it's, again, these very interesting conversations that I really, really love that this show's bringing up. Other things that we get here are, we have the opening sequence where we meet the Paraguayan man, I think, right, it was Paraguayan? Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was Paraguayan man that Carol called last episode. And we see that he has holed himself up and be isolating himself. And again, we sort of get a reiteration of this idea of like individualism. Like, I do not need anybody else. I'm going to eat food out of the garbage before I take it and trust these other people with anything. And again, it's like conversations of trust, individualism versus collectivism. This idea of like, he's trying to do it all on his own, but he can't trust these other people, yet he will have to survive some way. But unlike last episode where Carol sort of demanded that I'm an independent person, bring me back my sprouts, and you could see the whole hive mind coming up and bring everything back into the sprouts, sort of exposing the lie that Carol was truly independent from the community when, it requires all those people to stock her sprouts. This guy is going to need to break, his sort of lines because he breaks into his tenants, their lockers. And you could see that as he writes out, is like, oh yes, like, sorry management had to break into your lockers, that he still respects private property when in this new hive mind world, private property isn't a thing. And private property also being sort of a basis for like capitalism and things like that and colonialism, like this idea that there's private versus public property, and that no longer exists in this world. There's no such thing as private property to a hive mind where everything belongs to everybody. And again, sort of bringing in these subtle themes of like, private property, individualism, lack of community, trust, all in that opening sequence. And I'm curious to see how he's going to come up against Carol and like, are they going to work together? How their ideologies are going to bounce off each other? They both seemingly value their individualism, but in slightly different ways. And I find that to be really interesting. So I'm curious to see how that's going to unfold over the rest of the show. We also finally get Carol finally starting to ask questions. Like, I think this is one of the biggest criticisms that a lot of people had, and I certainly did as well, is like, why are you not asking these questions, starting to figure out how the hive mind works? There's so many questions that you could be asking about this, and she hasn't been doing it. Now, to a degree, I understand. It's only been 7 days since, like, the world ended for her and the love of her life died, so I'm willing to give her grace, but again, pacing-wise within the show, I certainly understand the frustration. I certainly had it a couple times here and there of, like, why isn't she asking these questions, these very, very basic questions? But now she's finally doing it. And there's some very interesting stuff being brought up in this conversation that she has with the delivery guy that she brings in to test sort of her questions about, like, can they lie, and sort of determine that, and if they're weirdly honest, as she states on her board. And what's interesting to me is obviously she finds out that they can't. And a lot of people have been relating the metaphor here with the hive mind to AI. And how AI, Vince Gilligan has famously said that he is very much against AI, and a lot of people have said, like, oh, maybe this is Vince Gilligan exploring his frustrations with AI. And I can certainly see that here to a degree, in the sense that AI is just weirdly affirming her and just sort of saying anything that she thinks that they think that she wants them to say. Which AI certainly does, and has led to like AI psychosis, where people literally believe they're like gods that the AI has told them. But I think that's distinct here because the AI doesn't really think, where we can clearly see the hive mind is thinking and desiring on what they think. There's some level of emotional intelligence of like couching their words and how to phrase things to Carol. So I think you certainly can draw some interesting ideas out of that metaphor that some people have drawn, but I don't think it's a exact one for one. But again, I think this is more of a thematic thing. So certainly there's some value in that relationship in terms of looking at this through that metaphor. But I don't think it's a direct sort of one-to-one, like this is Vince Gilligan expressing his fears about AI here. Because there is a slightly difference there. And I like that they are trying to navigate around like hurting Carol's feelings. But also there's this thing about like, what I'm sort of curious about is that they're affirming here is like, we all loved your work, but they relate it to like, yeah, there's people who like, we're going to die by suicide and we're saved by your work, and we view it through that lens, and that means a lot to us. Like, every single part of your book is lovely to us because someone loved a piece of it somewhere, and we love that. And I think that's a fascinating idea. Like, you know, one person may only love this part of your book, but another person may love this part of your book, and so we'll both love, we as the hive mind love it totally. And I also am curious about, why did Carol not, and this is the question I would have asked, like, what about people who hated my work? Who hated my work? And what does that mean to you? Like, if you do love and also hate every piece of my work, there had to be reviewers who hated my work that read it and thought it was trash. Like, what does that relate to you? And also, they're relating, this is another question that I have, is that, like, Carol asks about Helen's opinion of her unpublished book. And, you know, Bitter Chrysalis is kind of on the nose for this show, about change and happiness and things like that. Bit of a on the nose metaphorical title there. But interesting question about, like, only Helen read it. So only Helen had an emotional reaction to it before the hive mind existed. Now, the hive mind may now have an opinion on the novel, having read it, because they'll remember it from Helen's memory. But they won't have an individual one in the way that there would be tons of people relating to Carol's book and now have become part of the hive mind. There's only Helen's opinion on the book and then the hive mind's. So how does that influence how the hive mind feels about Carol's book? Will other people within the hive mind now read the book through Helen's memory of it and have a differing opinion from Helen? Will there be just one hive mind opinion from Helen? Do they get emotional stimuli from reading it individually within the hive mind that all then filters through the hive mind? So many interesting questions that I wish Carol had asked. It's one of those like interesting idea that the show is not delving into. But again, now also Carol is learning that how Helen protected her to a degree, and you know, those lies that you sometimes, lies is the wrong word, but those things that you don't say in a relationship to make someone else feel better. Like, everyone does it. There's things that, you know, bother you about another person that you're like, I love this person. I love them in spite of this or because of this, or it's just a thing that's about them that I know about them, that like Helen was also doing, but now it's kind of filtered through this hive mind thing. And it's, again, just a really fascinating idea that I'm so curious to learn more about. Then we also have this really wonderful sequence where Carol takes some truth serum on herself to see if it actually works. And I like those little bits in there where we see that she's still upset about Carol, like her breaking down, the sort of funny bits about like, oh man, why do they have to make Zosha so fuckable? And so we know that there's a physical desire on Carol's part for Zosha, which is interesting. And also her wanting to figure out from Zosha if the hive mind is reversible. And you know, again, it goes back to agency, because she's trying to get this information out of Zosha against her will, but it's against the hive mind's will. And I guess this is one of those things where it's like, I don't think I would have a problem with a hive mind if you could try it and choose to leave it, or at least have a choice to enter it. The hive mind didn't give anyone agency, and is not even trying to give Helen any agency. Again, going back to that conversion therapy thing that we were talking about at the top of this review. And you know, I think I would have less of a problem to be like, join us or not, you can have the chance to join, it's your choice. It's again why this is me being a Trekkie star, this is an aside, but it's why I was so frustrated that we never got more of Gerati Borg from the end of Star Trek Picard Season 2. If without spoiling too much of that season, there's a very similar idea to this hive mind with the end of Star Trek Picard Season 2 that's never brought up again in Star Trek Picard Season 3 or anything after, which is very frustrating because I was so curious about that idea, and now we're at least exploring it here. But man, if I ever got to write a show set after that Star Trek Picard season, that's an idea I would definitely want to explore in further depth within Star Trek. But anyways, we're getting it here to a degree. And yeah, it's like consent within this that she's taking away. And now we can clearly see that Carol has a goal of like trying to reverse this. And it does exist, potentially. We don't know 100% for sure, but basically we get the non-answer is the answer, as Carol said. So yeah, a really good episode. I'm trying to think, there's so many things in this show that like, I just wanted to touch upon. There's so many philosophical ideas that, again, a video essay will probably delve into deeper than my quick off-the-cuff reviews, having just watched the episode, can go into. So certainly I'll ruminate on the show more as we go. But just at the end of the day, the show is so fascinating. I have so many ideas that I really love about it. I love that it's exploring all these themes of individualism versus, community assimilation, that sort of thing. And through a queer lens. And it's doing it rather well for a show written mostly by a straight cis white dude. So good on him. Good on Vince Gilligan. Anyways, what did you think about the show, though? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down below. Let me know if you liked or hated this episode. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Until next time, I hope you all live long and prosper.